The iron collar bit into Elizabeth Parker's neck as the late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the Wyoming territory. Her father's drunken rage having finally escalated beyond mere threats and beatings to this chaining his own daughter to a wagon wheel like a disobedient dog. It was 1878, and at 22, Elizabeth had endured her father's worsening behavior since her mother's death 3 years prior. The once prosperous cattle rancher had descended into a whiskey-soaked madness that transformed him from stern but fair to cruel and unpredictable. "You'll stay there until you agree to marry Hoffman," Vernon Parker bellowed, his breath reeking of cheap whiskey. "His money will save this ranch, and by God, you'll do your part or starve right here." Elizabeth's throat was parched, her blue dress soiled with dust, but her eyes burned with defiance. "I will never marry that man. He's twice my age and cruel as you've become." Her father's calloused hand struck her cheek, the sting bringing tears to her eyes despite her determination not to show weakness. "Then you'll die stubborn," he spat, staggering back toward the house. The old ranch house stood 100 yards away, once her mother's pride with its neat picket fence and flower beds that now lay withered and neglected. Beyond stretched the failing cattle operation that had been in the Parker family for 2 generations. Elizabeth knew her father was right about one thing: they were nearly bankrupt, but selling her like cattle to Josiah Hoffman, the banker who held their mortgage, was not the answer. The sun began its slow descent toward the distant mountains as Elizabeth tested the chain. It was secured to the large rear wheel of their supply wagon with a heavy padlock, the key undoubtedly in her father's pocket. The iron collar around her neck allowed little movement, and the summer heat made her dizzy with thirst. As darkness fell, she heard the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching along the trail that connected their isolated ranch to the nearest town of Sweetwater, 20 miles away. Hope fluttered in her chest. Perhaps it was Sheriff Miller making his monthly rounds. Instead, a tall figure on horseback emerged from the growing darkness, a stranger riding a magnificent black stallion. He slowed his horse as he approached, clearly surprised to find a woman chained to a wagon wheel in the middle of nowhere. "Madam." The voice was deep, questioning, with a slight accent she couldn't place. "Are you in need of assistance?" Elizabeth nearly laughed at the understatement. "Sir, as you can plainly see, I am chained like an animal by my father, who intends to force me to marry against my will." The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jangling softly as his boots hit the dirt. In the fading light, she could make out a lean, muscular frame, dark hair beneath a well-worn Stetson, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "My name is Zachary Blackwood," he said, approaching cautiously. "May I ask yours?" "Elizabeth Parker," she replied, her voice cracking with thirst. "My father is inside, likely passed out drunk by now." Zachary knelt beside her, examining the chain and collar. His face, now visible in the moonlight, was handsome but weathered, with a scar running along his jawline. He couldn't be much older than 30. "This is barbaric," he said quietly. "How long have you been here?" "Since noon." "He plans to leave me until I agree to marry Josiah Hoffman, the banker who holds our mortgage." She couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. Zachary's expression darkened. "Hoffman from Sweetwater, I've had dealings with him. No woman should be forced to marry such a man." He stood suddenly, alert to a sound from the house. Vernon Parker had emerged onto the porch, rifle in hand. "Get away from my property, stranger," he shouted, his words slurred. "That includes my daughter." Zachary turned slowly, his hand deliberately away from his holstered pistol. "Mr. Parker, I'm just passing through and stopped to offer assistance. It's not right to chain a woman like this." "Mind your own business, cowboy." Vernon stumbled down the porch steps. "Elizabeth is my daughter, and she'll do as I say. She'll marry Hoffman and save this ranch, or she can rot on that wheel." Elizabeth saw Zachary's shoulders tense, but his voice remained calm. "Sir, I'm happy to discuss this reasonably. Perhaps I could buy you a drink and we could talk about alternatives." It was a clever approach. Vernon's bloodshot eyes gleamed at the mention of a drink. "You got whiskey?" "In my saddlebag. Good Kentucky bourbon," Zachary replied smoothly. Vernon hesitated, then lowered his rifle slightly. "Bring it here, but don't try anything funny." Zachary returned to his horse and retrieved a flask. Elizabeth watched as he approached her father cautiously, offering the container. Vernon snatched it, uncorked it with his teeth, and took a long swallow. "Now, about your daughter," Zachary began. "Nothing to discuss," Vernon interrupted, taking another drink. "She's marrying Hoffman." "End of story." "What if there was another way to save your ranch?" Zachary suggested. "I've been looking for cattle land myself. Perhaps we could come to an arrangement." Vernon eyed him suspiciously, but the whiskey was working its magic, making him more pliable. "You got money." "Enough," Zachary replied. "Why don't we discuss it inside? It's getting cold out here." Vernon glanced at Elizabeth, then back at Zachary. The whiskey was clearly clouding his already impaired judgment. "Fine, but she stays put." "At least let me give her some water," Zachary insisted. "What good is she to Hoffman if she's dead from thirst?" Vernon waved dismissively. "Make it quick." Zachary retrieved his canteen and knelt beside Elizabeth. As he held the water to her lips, he whispered, "I'll come back for you, be ready." She drank gratefully, searching his face for any sign of deception but finding only determination in his eyes. "Why would you help me?" she whispered. "Some things are just wrong," he answered simply, before straightening and following her father into the house. Through the windows, Elizabeth could see them talking, her father gesturing wildly as Zachary maintained his composed demeanor. An hour passed, then two. Eventually, the lights went out and silence fell over the ranch. Elizabeth fought against sleep, her uncomfortable position and the cold night air keeping her painfully awake. Just as she began to lose hope, a shadow detached itself from the darkness of the barn. Zachary approached silently, carrying something in his hands. "Your father's passed out," he whispered. "Drank himself unconscious after I kept refilling his glass. In his hands were heavy bolt cutters. Found these in your barn, they should do the trick." "He'll kill you if he wakes up," Elizabeth warned. "Then we'll have to be quick and quiet," Zachary replied, positioning the cutters around the chain near the collar. With a powerful squeeze, the metal snapped. Elizabeth felt immediate relief as the weight of the chain fell away, though the collar itself remained locked around her neck. "We'll need to find a blacksmith to remove this properly," Zachary explained, helping her to her feet, her legs, stiff from hours of sitting, nearly buckled beneath her. Zachary caught her, his strong arms supporting her weight. For a moment, they stood close enough that she could smell the leather and trail dust on his clothes, a strangely comforting scent. "Can you ride?" he asked. Elizabeth nodded. "I've been riding since before I could walk." "Good, get whatever you need from the house quickly." "We need to be gone before he wakes." "What about the rest of the chain?" she asked, lifting the length still dangling from her collar. Zachary pulled a bandana from his pocket. "Wrap this around it to keep it from jingling. We'll deal with it properly when we're safe." Elizabeth crept into the house, avoiding the creaking floorboards she knew so well. Her father lay sprawled across the kitchen table, snoring loudly. She packed a small bag with her mother's locket, a change of clothes, and the little money she had saved. As she passed the desk in her father's study, she hesitated, then took the deed to the ranch and her mother's wedding ring from the drawer. Outside, Zachary had saddled her mare, a spirited palomino named Sunflower. "You ready?" he asked, already mounted on his black stallion. Elizabeth looked back at the only home she'd ever known, feeling an unexpected pang of regret. Then she remembered the collar around her neck and the years of abuse since her mother's death. "Yes," she said firmly, mounting Sunflower with practiced ease despite her stiffness. "I'm ready." They rode out under a canopy of stars, heading east toward the mountains instead of toward Sweetwater. Elizabeth didn't question Zachary's choice of direction. Anywhere away from her father and Hoffman was fine with her. They rode in silence for several hours, putting miles between themselves and the Parker Ranch. Just before dawn, they stopped at a small creek to water the horses and rest. "Why did you help me?" Elizabeth finally asked, watching Zachary as he refilled their canteens. He paused, seeming to consider his answer carefully. "I know what it's like to be trapped," he said finally. "No one should be forced to live a life they didn't choose." There was a story there, Elizabeth sensed, but didn't press. Instead, she asked, "Where are we going?" "There's a small town called Pine Ridge about 2 days' ride from here. I know a blacksmith there who can remove that collar without asking questions." Zachary handed her a canteen. After that, you're free to go wherever you want. And where will you go?" She asked, surprised by how much she cared about the answer. "I haven't decided yet. I was heading to California, but—" He trailed off, looking westward toward the mountains. They made camp as the sun rose, finding shelter in a stand of cottonwood trees. Zachary insisted Elizabeth get some sleep while he kept watch. "What about you?" she asked, noting the fatigue in his eyes. "I'll sleep later. Your father might come looking once he wakes up." Elizabeth couldn't argue with that logic. As she settled onto the bedroll Zachary had provided, she found herself studying him the way he moved with easy confidence, the kindness in his eyes that contrasted with the hardness of his weathered face. "Thank you," she said softly. Not many men would have stopped. He nodded once, a small smile lifting the corner of his mouth. "Get some rest, Miss Parker. We have a long journey ahead." Sleep came surprisingly easily despite the circumstances, and when Elizabeth awoke, the sun was high overhead. She found Zachary cleaning his revolver, his movements methodical and practiced. "You were in the war, weren't you?" she asked, sitting up. He looked surprised. "How did you know?" "My uncle fought for the Union. He cleaned his guns the same way like it was a ritual." Zachary nodded. "Cavalry." "Enlisted in '63, fought until Appomattox. You were just a boy." 17, he confirmed, old enough to kill, too young to understand why. He reassembled the revolver with swift movements. "We should move on soon. Your father might have sobered up by now." They continued eastward, keeping to less traveled trails. Zachary proved to be a skilled woodsman, pointing out edible plants and teaching Elizabeth how to cover their tracks. By nightfall, they had reached the foothills of the Medicine Bow Mountains. "We'll camp here," Zachary decided, indicating a sheltered hollow near a spring. "It's defensible if we need it to be." As they set up camp, Elizabeth noticed Zachary wincing when he lifted his saddle. "You're hurt," she observed. He shook his head dismissively. "Old injury, acts up sometimes." "Let me see," she insisted, her tone leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, Zachary removed his jacket and lifted his shirt to reveal a jagged scar across his left side. The skin around it was inflamed. "Comanche arrow 6 years ago," he explained, "never healed quite right." Elizabeth retrieved a small tin of salve from her bag. "My mother taught me about healing. This will help with the inflammation." He tensed when her fingers touched his skin, but gradually relaxed as she worked the salve into the scar tissue. The intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. "Your mother sounds like a remarkable woman," he said quietly. "She was," Elizabeth agreed, her throat tightening with emotion. "She held our family together. After she died, Father just broke. That doesn't excuse what he did to you." "No," she agreed, finishing her ministrations and stepping back. "But I understand how grief can change a person." They ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, supplemented with wild berries Elizabeth had gathered. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped, and Elizabeth found herself shivering despite her shawl. Without a word, Zachary moved closer and draped his coat around her shoulders. The weight of it was comforting, as was his nearness. "Tell me about California," she said, wanting to hear his voice in the darkness. "I've never been," he admitted. "But I've heard stories of orchards heavy with fruit and mild winters. Land a man can build something on without freezing half the year or baking the other half." "Sounds lovely," Elizabeth murmured. "What would you build there?" Zachary was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "A horse ranch, maybe. I've always had a way with horses." "I noticed. Your stallion is magnificent." Midnight. "Bought him as a colt with my last army pay." "Best decision I ever made." He paused. "What about you? What would you do if you could do anything?" Elizabeth considered the question. No one had ever asked her that before. "I'd like to teach," she said finally. "My mother taught me to read and write, and I taught some of the ranch hands' children. Seeing a child's face when they first understand letters becoming words, there's nothing like it." They talked late into the night, sharing pieces of themselves neither had intended to reveal. Elizabeth learned that Zachary had been a drifter since the war, taking work where he could find at cattle drives, hunting, sometimes guiding settlers through dangerous territory. He'd saved enough money to buy land but hadn't found the right place to settle. "Why were you passing by our ranch?" she asked. "I'd been in Sweetwater looking at some property, was heading back to Cheyenne when I took a wrong turn." he chuckled softly, never did have a good sense of direction. Lucky for me, Elizabeth said. Their eyes met across the small fire, and something passed between them an understanding, a connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. The next morning, they continued their journey, making good time through the mountain passes. Zachary seemed to relax as they put more distance between themselves and the Parker Ranch, even singing occasionally in a surprisingly pleasant baritone. By late afternoon, they descended into a lush valley Elizabeth had never seen before, despite having lived in the territory her entire life. "It's beautiful," she breathed, taking in the meandering stream and wildflower-dotted meadows. "Isn't it?" Zachary agreed. "Not many people know about this valley. The locals call it paradise." They made camp early, taking advantage of the plentiful resources. Zachary caught fish from the stream while Elizabeth gathered wild onions and greens to accompany them. As they sat by the fire enjoying their meal, Zachary suddenly went still, his head cocked to one side. "What is it?" Elizabeth whispered, instantly alert. "Riders," he said grimly. "At least 3 coming fast." Elizabeth's heart pounded. "My father, possibly, or Hoffman's men." Zachary quickly doused the fire. "We need to move now." They packed hastily, abandoning the remains of their meal. Zachary helped Elizabeth onto Sunflower, then handed her the reins to Midnight. "Follow the stream east," he instructed. "There's a hunter's cabin about 5 miles on. I'll meet you there." "What are you going to do?" she demanded, suddenly afraid. "Lead them away, then circle back." He checked his revolver. "Don't worry, I'm good at disappearing." "Zachary, no, Elizabeth," he interrupted, his hand covering hers. "Trust me." Their eyes locked, and she saw determination there, but something else too, something that made her breath catch. "Be careful," she whispered. He squeezed her hand once, then disappeared into the trees, moving silently despite his spurs. Elizabeth hesitated only a moment before urging Sunflower forward, leading Midnight by the reins. She followed the stream as instructed, constantly looking over her shoulder, straining to hear any sounds of pursuit or, worse, gunfire. The cabin appeared just where Zachary had said it would, a small log structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. Elizabeth unsaddled the horses and led them to a small corral hidden behind the cabin, where they would be out of sight from the main trail. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table and chairs, and a narrow bed. She resisted the urge to light a fire, instead pacing nervously in the growing darkness. Hours passed with no sign of Zachary. Elizabeth's imagination conjured increasingly horrific scenarios: Zachary captured, Zachary shot, Zachary lying injured somewhere in the forest. Just as she had decided to go looking for him, the door opened. Zachary stood in the doorway, looking exhausted but unharmed. Relief flooded through Elizabeth with such force that she moved without thinking, throwing her arms around him. "You're alive," she breathed against his chest. His arms came around her slowly, as if he wasn't quite sure what to do with them. "It was your father and 2 ranch hands," he said. "I led them north toward the old mining camps. They'll be chasing shadows for days." Elizabeth pulled back slightly, suddenly aware of their proximity. "You're sure they didn't follow you?" "Positive." He released her and moved to the fireplace. "It's safe to light a fire now. It's going to be a cold night." As he built the fire, Elizabeth noticed him favoring his right arm. "You're hurt," he shrugged. "Branch caught me when I was riding fast." "It's nothing." She insisted on examining it anyway, finding a nasty gash that needed cleaning. As she tended to him, using water from her canteen and strips torn from her petticoat for bandages, she found herself studying his face in the flickering firelight. "Why are you really helping me?" she asked softly. "You could have been killed today." Zachary's eyes met hers, dark and serious. "When I saw you chained to that wagon wheel, something broke in me. No one deserves to be treated that way, especially not someone like you. Someone like me, strong, brave." His voice dropped lower. "Beautiful." The word hung between them, changing the air in the small cabin. Elizabeth felt her cheeks warm, and not from the fire's heat. "I'm not brave," she whispered. "I endured my father's cruelty for years without fighting back." "You survived," Zachary countered. "And when the chance came to escape, you took it despite the risk. That's courage." His hand came up to touch the iron collar still around her neck, his fingers gentle. "Tomorrow we'll get this off you, and then you'll truly be free." They slept that night on opposite sides of the cabin, Elizabeth on the narrow bed, Zachary on a bedroll near the fire. But something had shifted between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of feelings neither had expected to develop. Dawn broke clear and cold. They ate a quick breakfast of the remaining fish, then set out for Pine Ridge. The town appeared by midday, a collection of wooden buildings straddling a dusty main street. "Keep your head down," Zachary advised as they approached. "Your father may have sent word to look for you." The blacksmith shop was at the far end of town, the sound of hammer on anvil announcing it before they saw it. Zachary went in first, speaking quietly to the burly man working at the forge. After a brief conversation, he beckoned Elizabeth inside. The blacksmith, introduced only as Gus, examined the collar with professional interest. "Crude work," he grunted, "but I can remove it. Sit there, miss." Elizabeth sat nervously on the indicated stool as Gus selected several tools. Zachary stood close by, his presence reassuring. "Hold very still," Gus instructed, positioning a thin chisel between the collar and her neck. "This will take precision." The next few minutes were tense, the only sounds the careful tapping of Gus's hammer and Elizabeth's controlled breathing. Finally, with a metallic snap, the collar gave way. "There," Gus said with satisfaction, removing the pieces. Elizabeth raised a hand to her neck, feeling the raw skin where the iron had chafed. The sensation of freedom was overwhelming. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Gus nodded gruffly. "No charge." Any man who'd do that to his daughter. He spat eloquently into the corner of his shop. Zachary paid him anyway, slipping coins into his hand before leading Elizabeth back outside. They walked to the general store, where Zachary insisted on buying supplies and a new dress for Elizabeth to replace her travel-worn clothes. "You don't need to do this," she protested. "Consider it an investment in your future as a teacher," he replied with a small smile. They took a room at the town's small hotel's separate rooms, though the proprietor's raised eyebrow at the arrangement made Elizabeth blush. After bathing and changing into her new dress, she met Zachary for dinner in the hotel's dining room. He stood when she entered, his expression making her self-conscious. The blue calico dress was simple but fit well, and she'd arranged her golden hair in a neat bun. "You look lovely," he said quietly as she sat down. Over a meal of beef stew and fresh bread luxuries after days on the trail, they discussed what would happen next. "The stagecoach comes through tomorrow," Zachary explained. "You could be in Denver by the end of the week. They have good schools there, always looking for teachers." Elizabeth nodded, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in her chest at the thought of saying goodbye to this man who had risked everything for her. "What about you?" she asked. "Still California," he looked down at his plate. "I was thinking of looking at land around here." "This valley has potential," hope flickered in Elizabeth's heart. "It's beautiful country." "It is," he agreed, meeting her eyes again. "Elizabeth, he was interrupted by the hotel owner approaching their table. "Mr. Blackwood, there's a gentleman asking after you, says it's urgent." Zachary frowned. "Did he give a name?" "No, sir, but he's waiting in the lobby." Zachary excused himself, his hand brushing against his holster as he left the dining room. Elizabeth waited anxiously, unable to eat another bite. When he returned several minutes later, his expression was grim. "Hoffman's in town," he said quietly, sitting back down. "That was one of my old army friends. Hoffman's got 4 men with him asking questions about us." Elizabeth's hand flew to her throat where the collar had been. "How did he find us?" "Your father must have gone to him when he couldn't find you himself." Zachary's jaw tightened. "We need to leave. Now." They slipped out the back door of the hotel, retrieving their horses from the livery stable. The liveryman, sensing trouble, asked no questions as they saddled up and rode out. Instead of taking the main road, Zachary led them along a narrow trail that skirted the edge of town. They rode hard until full dark, finally stopping in a dense grove of pines. "We should be safe here for the night," Zachary said, helping Elizabeth dismount. "We'll head for Cheyenne tomorrow. You can catch a train east from there." "And you?" Elizabeth asked, her voice small. Zachary busied himself with unsaddling the horses. "I still have business with Hoffman." What kind of business? She demanded, suddenly afraid, the kind that ensures he never bothers you again. His voice was hard, a tone she hadn't heard from him before. Zachary, no, he's dangerous and he has men willing to kill for him. So do I, he gestured toward the saddlebags. There's something I haven't told you. I'm not just a drifter. I work for the Pinkerton Detective Agency. I was in Sweetwater investigating Hoffman for land fraud. Elizabeth stared at him, stunned. You're a detective? Yes. Hoffman's been forcing ranchers out, manipulating mortgage terms, then buying their land cheap. Your father was his latest target. Zachary ran a hand through his hair. I had no idea he was planning to marry you as part of the scheme, so helping me. Started as part of my job, he admitted, but it became something else very quickly. He stepped closer, his eyes intent on hers. Elizabeth, I've never met anyone like you. These past days, riding together, talking, I've never felt so alive, her heart hammered in her chest. Zachary, I know it's too soon, he continued. We barely know each other, but when this is over, when Hoffman is behind bars where he belongs, I'd like the chance to court you properly. If you'll allow it. Elizabeth thought of all the suitors her father had approved over the years, dull men with dull prospects who saw her as little more than a brood mare. None had made her feel the way Zachary did, valued, respected, alive. I'd like that, she whispered. His smile transformed his face, erasing years of hardness. Slowly, giving her every chance to step away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss. It lasted only a moment, but it sealed something between them, a promise, a beginning. They made camp with the easy efficiency of partners who had quickly learned each other's rhythms. As they sat by the small fire, Zachary outlined his plan. I have evidence of Hoffman's schemes, but I need documentation from his office in Sweetwater. Once I have that, I can wire my superiors in Denver and they'll send agents to arrest him. Let me help, Elizabeth said immediately. I can get into his office. No one would suspect me. It's too dangerous, Zachary protested. I know Hoffman's routines. He takes lunch at the hotel every day at noon, always for exactly 1 hour. His clerk takes that time to visit his sweetheart at the millinery shop. She leaned forward. Zachary, this is my fight too. He was going to use me as part of his scheme. I deserve to help bring him down. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. We'll do it together. They spent the next day planning, working out every detail. They would return to Sweetwater the following morning, time their entry to Hoffman's office during his lunch hour, find the documents Zachary needed, then escape before anyone realized they had been there. That night, as they prepared for sleep, Elizabeth found herself reluctant to be apart from Zachary, even across their small camp. Zachary, she said softly, would you hold me tonight? Just hold me. In answer, he spread his bedroll next to hers and opened his arms. She settled against him, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. When this is over, he murmured into her hair, I want to show you the land I was looking at before I found you. There's a meadow that would be perfect for a house and a stream with the sweetest water you've ever tasted. It sounds wonderful, she whispered. It could be ours, he said, his voice hesitant, if you wanted that. Elizabeth tilted her head up to look at him. Are you asking me to marry you, Zachary Blackwood? Too soon, he asked, a rare uncertainty in his eyes. Not when you know something is right, she replied and kissed him. They rode into Sweetwater the next morning, Elizabeth's hair tucked under a hat, a man's coat concealing her figure. They separated at the edge of town, Zachary heading to the telegraph office while Elizabeth made her way to Hoffman's bank. Just as she had predicted, at precisely noon, Hoffman emerged from the bank and headed toward the hotel. 10 minutes later, his clerk slipped out, walking quickly toward the millinery shop. Elizabeth met Zachary behind the bank. He picked the lock on the back door with practiced ease, and they slipped inside. Hoffman's office was at the rear of the building, a large room dominated by a massive desk. They worked quickly, Zachary examining ledgers while Elizabeth searched through correspondence. Here, she said after several tense minutes, holding up a stack of letters. These are from my father. Hoffman was threatening to foreclose unless he agreed to the marriage. Zachary nodded grimly, taking the letters and adding them to the ledger he'd found. And this shows he's been doing the same to half a dozen other ranchers. This is everything we need. They froze at the sound of the front door opening. Voices drifted back to them. Hoffman had returned early. Zachary motioned Elizabeth toward the window. They slipped out just as Hoffman's footsteps approached his office, dropping into the alley below. They ran to where they'd left their horses, mounting quickly and galloping out of town. They didn't stop until they reached the telegraph office in the next town, where Zachary sent an urgent message to his superiors in Denver. "It's done," he said, rejoining Elizabeth outside. "They'll have agents here by tomorrow. Hoffman won't know what hit him." The relief on Elizabeth's face turned to alarm as she looked past him. "Zachary," he turned to see Vernon Parker approaching, rifle in hand. Elizabeth's father looked worse than before, unshaven, clothes disheveled, eyes wild with rage and drink. "You," he snarled, raising the rifle. "You stole my daughter." Zachary stepped in front of Elizabeth. "Mr. Parker, put the rifle down. We can talk about this." "Nothing to talk about," Vernon spat. "She belongs at home and you're a dead man." "Father, stop," Elizabeth cried, moving to stand beside Zachary. "Hoffman was using you. He's been cheating ranchers all over the territory. We have proof." Vernon's hands trembled on the rifle. "You're lying. He was going to save the ranch." "He was going to steal it," Zachary said calmly. "Just like he's stolen from others. The law is coming for him tomorrow." "And what about my daughter? You think I don't see how she looks at you?" Vernon's finger tightened on the trigger. "She was supposed to save our family, not run off with some drifter." "I'm not a drifter," Zachary replied, his voice steady. "I'm a Pinkerton detective, and I'm in love with your daughter. I plan to marry her if she'll have me." Elizabeth's hand found Zachary's, squeezing tightly. "Mr. Parker," Zachary continued, "I understand wanting to protect what's yours, but Elizabeth isn't property. She's a woman with her own heart and mind, and she deserves better than being chained to a wagon wheel." Vernon's face contorted, a complex mix of emotions crossing his features. For a terrible moment, Elizabeth thought he would shoot. Then, slowly, the fight seemed to drain out of him. The rifle barrel lowered toward the ground. "What am I supposed to do?" he asked, his voice suddenly that of an old, broken man. "The ranch is all I have left of her mother." "We can help you save it," Elizabeth said gently. "Legally, honestly, but you have to stop drinking, Father. And you have to treat me like your daughter, not your possession." Vernon looked at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time in years. "You look just like her," he whispered. "Your mother." "I know," Elizabeth said softly. "She would want us to be happy, Father, both of us." The rifle slipped from Vernon's hands, falling to the dirt. He covered his face, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Elizabeth approached him cautiously, placing a hand on his arm. "Come with us, Father. Let's start again." 3 months later, Elizabeth stood on the porch of a new cabin, looking out over the valley Zachary had described their valley. The autumn sun turned the aspens to gold, and in the distance, cattle grazed on lush grass. The sound of hoofbeats made her smile. Zachary appeared over the rise, riding beside another horse-drawn wagon. Her father handled the reins, looking healthier than he had in years, the weeks at a sanatorium in Denver having helped him overcome his dependence on whiskey. They had sold the old Parker Ranch, using part of the money to buy this land and the rest to establish a trust that would support Vernon in his old age. Hoffman was in prison, awaiting trial for fraud and extortion, his scheme exposed thanks to Zachary's evidence. Zachary dismounted, crossing the yard with long strides to sweep Elizabeth into his arms. His kiss was no longer hesitant but confident, filled with the promise of their future together. "The last of the furniture from town," he said when they finally broke apart, "just in time for the wedding." Their wedding was set for the following week, a small ceremony with just a few friends from nearby ranches and the Pinkerton colleagues who had helped bring Hoffman to justice. "I was thinking," Elizabeth said, linking her arm through his as they walked to help her father with the wagon, "about adding a schoolroom to the cabin. There are several families within riding distance with children who need teaching." Zachary smiled, the scar along his jawline crinkling. "I think that's a fine idea, Mrs. Almost Blackwood." As they reached the wagon, Vernon climbed down, nodding to Zachary before turning to his daughter. "Elizabeth, I found this among your mother's things." He held out a small wooden box. "I think she would want you to have it now." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet set with small turquoise stones. It was her mother's and her mother's before that, Vernon explained. She always planned to give it to you on your wedding day. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears as Zachary fastened it around her wrist. It felt right, this connection to her past as she embraced her future. That evening, as the sun set over their land, Zachary and Elizabeth sat on the porch, her head resting on his shoulder. In the barn nearby, Vernon could be heard singing softly as he tended the horses, a man finding his way back to himself after years lost in grief and bitterness. "I never thought I'd find this," Elizabeth murmured. "Home, happiness, you." Zachary kissed the top of her head, his arm tightening around her. "When I saw you chained to that wagon wheel, I was just trying to do the right thing. I never imagined I was actually riding toward my future." Elizabeth smiled, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. From the moment of her rescue to this peaceful evening, their journey had been unexpected and at times dangerous. But here, with the weight of the iron collar replaced by the gentle touch of Zachary's hand, Elizabeth knew that being broken free had led to being truly found.